Hi everyone! In today's video, we're going to be beginning our discussions about the major scale. As I've mentioned before, it's often very useful to relate music theory concepts to the piano keyboard. Scales are no different. The major scale is a specific pattern of small steps, we call half steps, and larger steps called whole steps that encompass an octave. Remember, an octave is from one note name up to or down to the next pitch of the same name. A half step is the distance from one note on the piano keyboard to the very next note, regardless of color, so white keys or black keys. Here's what I mean. The distance between this C4 or middle C and the key right above it, C sharp or D flat, is a half step. From C sharp or D flat to D is also a half step. From D to E flat, a half step. From E flat up to E, a half step. Now here's where some students get confused. Between E and F, notice that we don't have any black keys. The same rule holds true. From E to F is also the distance of a half step. From F to F sharp, a half step. And the pattern continues. Draw your attention back to C4, or middle C. Now, if we want to descend from C4, the very next key is also a white key, or B natural. Again, the distance from one key on the piano to the very next one, regardless of its color, white or black, is a half step. So from C to the key directly below it, B natural, is the distance of a half step. Now, the distance of a whole step is when we skip the very next key on the piano and go instead to the following one. Here's what I mean. From C, skipping C sharp, going straight to D, is the distance of a whole step. From D, again skipping E flat or D sharp to the next white key, a whole step. This is where some students get confused. There are no black keys between E and F. This is still the distance of a half step, not a whole step, because there are no keys in between. Now that we've got that straight, let's talk about the specific pattern of whole steps and half steps that comprise the major scale. Here I've written a scale from C4 to C5. Notice from C4 up to C5, placing a pitch on every line or space, using only the white keys, we get this pattern of whole steps and half steps. This pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, is the same pattern found in every major scale. This is why all major scales kind of sound the same. They're comprised of the same intervals. You probably don't think of your major scales this way, comprised of whole steps or half steps, but it can be a useful way to approach them, especially when we start talking about minor scales and minor keys. Also, like always, it makes it handy to relate it to the piano keyboard. Now, what if we wanted to build a scale starting on a note other than C? The same pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, applies here as well. Let's try it starting on G. We'll talk about this later, but one rule of scales is that the scale always starts on the note of its name. So a G scale will start on G. From G to the next note above is A, or a whole step. The next whole step above A is B. Now, this is where we get to the first half step in the pattern. From B to C is a half step. See how B and C are right next to each other on the keyboard? From C to D, a whole step. From D to E, another whole step. Now we know from E to F is a half step. But if we're following the pattern, we're not supposed to have a half step here, right? We should have a whole step. This is where the concept of accidentals comes into play. Accidentals are symbols used to alter a pitch, either up or down. In a G major scale, we would need to raise this F one half step to make it fit the pattern, making it an F sharp. We'll talk more about this in another video. So now we have G to A, whole, A to B, whole, B natural to C, half, right? They're right next to each other. C to D, whole, D to E, whole. And now by adding that sharp to the F, we're going to skip over F and move to the next black key, F sharp, for a whole step, finishing the pattern with a half step, F sharp to G. To make my point, here's what this scale would sound like if we didn't raise that F to make it an F sharp to fit the pattern of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Doesn't sound like a major scale, does it? And there we go. That concludes our introduction of the major scale. As always, I highly recommend when doing your theory homework, you sit at the piano and use the keyboard to help you.